Julie Egan and Eric Bratberg. Julie and Eric, could you please stand? Where are they? There we go, back here. So this is a very competitive process. We end up with literally dozens of applications. We pick 2 each year. Julie is an economic advisor for the United States State Department. During her fellowship, she'll explore the Maghreb and the wider Atlantic partnerships, challenges, and opportunities. Eric Bratberg is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a researcher for the Swedish Institute for International Affairs. His project is entitled A Second Transatlantic Anchor, the Strategic Implications of TTIP for Strengthening the EU-US Partnership. We are very much looking forward to their work over the coming months. Congratulations. Please join me in. Thank you. Now, we made a slight schedule change, so we're going to cut out a coffee and do 2 interesting conversations to finish up this last hour. For the first, it's my distinct honor to welcome back to Brussels Forum the President of the European Council, His Excellency Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, who will be interviewed by the London Bureau Chief of the New York Times, Mr. Stephen Erlanger. Please, gentlemen.
Well, I'm sorry we're not a coffee break, but in any case, we'll do our best. Thank you, Craig. And also, Craig, let me just take 2 seconds to thank you for all of the work you've done for this conference and others. We've known each other for decades, and I'm very grateful. So thank you. It's a great honor to be here and to have Herman Van Rompuy here with us. It's short, so I'll get right to it. I don't have to introduce you. There was one time when I remember talking to someone who was in a coalition with you once in Belgium, named Louis Tobac. And he said that Mr. Van Rompuy, he said, is a sober personality, someone who doesn't shine. That's the major reason that he gets there. But once he gets there, he starts enlarging his territory. That's what he's doing now. So I wanted to start simply by asking you, you're getting toward the end, you're beginning to have those last thoughts about a very, very difficult 5-year term. How have you enlarged your territory? Where did it come from? What have you built? Will it last?
First, one correction. You underestimate my charisma. Yeah, definitely.
You've just proven the point.
So I took this job now almost 5 years ago, and some are saying that the European Council became the most important institution in the European Union. There are 2 reasons for this. I don't know if it is true, but there are 2 reasons. The first reason, of course, is they had a brilliant president of the council. That's the first. And
that's a given.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. But the second reason is that we had a crisis. And a crisis helps a lot to put people together. We can't have a meeting with the 28 leaders and then after the meeting I had to confront the press and say, we had an excellent meeting, but we just didn't agree on anything. So that's impossible. We had to agree. We had to converge. We had to take decisions. Otherwise, we were punished by the markets the day after. Yeah. And so the crisis helped a lot to have that consensus. We have to take decisions unanimously. And the decisions were so important, so much taxpayers' money was involved, that those decisions could only have been taken by the leaders themselves. And that made the European Council a very important body.
I mean, of course, but I mean, when you're in the kitchen, of course, you know, you're very conscious of everything that you're doing and everything that's going on. From the outside, though, it looks like there are fires everywhere and it doesn't look very organized. I mean, do you have real regrets over the way this crisis started?
It started, first of all, it started with the financial crisis.
Sure.
But then afterwards, we saw that a lot of structural problems in some of our member states, even more than just a couple, came to the surface. Underlying problems, structural problems, which were covered by, let's say, the first decade of the euro, a period with rather high economic growth compared to today. And the euro was such a success, such a stable country, that all were benefiting from low interest rates. And this gave the occasion to private investors and to public authorities to spend money at a very low cost.
A lot of money.
A very low cost.
Absolutely.
So you had that accumulation of private and public debt. And those underlying problems came to the surface.
Who do you blame for
in
not
2009.
identifying those problems? They were there. Obviously, the bond markets weren't paying attention. They just assumed that German interest rates would work for everybody. But wasn't part of the point of the European Union and Eurostat and the Commission to identify these problems and do something about it before they became a crisis?
I'm not blaming anybody. The past is the past. But if we had had the instruments we have today, this would haven't happened.
Let me ask you something else. I remember the beginning of the crisis. First, everyone blamed the Americans because of Lehman Brothers, you know, and then everyone said, Trichet said, oh, you know, we couldn't possibly have a default within the euro system. And then everyone said we couldn't possibly bring in the IMF because that's for poor countries. I remember sitting with Christine Lagarde, who actually now runs the IMF, when she was finance minister, telling me, we don't need the IMF, perhaps we should develop our own IMF. So was there a problem of amour propre and pride in the beginning? Didn't that help create the crisis?
Oh, it is a complicated process. But the IMF was mentioned as a partner already from the very beginning of the crisis. My first European Council was the 10th of February. At that moment, the IMF was already in our communique as some kind of advisor, using its expertise. But 2 months later, they were a full partner, even with money. It was not a time of Christine Lagarde, it was a time of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, even at that time.
Which was part of the reason, I think, why the French didn't want the IMF involved. Because Sarkozy thought he was going to run against Strauss-Kahn.
At that moment, it was not the case. No.
You couldn't possibly comment.
He was even appointed by Sarkozy on the proposal of Sarkozy. It's much more complicated.
To sort of keep him out of France.
Yeah, but you have not to see everywhere conspiracies. Right. Things are sometimes more simple than you think.
Let me ask you, I mean, one of the things that you learned how to do, perhaps you learned as a Belgian prime minister when you kept things quiet for a while, was to manage the political expectations of the other leaders. Did you find that an easy thing to do? Did it drive you crazy? What lesson would you give to your successor about how to manage these difficult people?
Yeah. First of all, it's not only manage political expectations, it's to get an agreement among 28 leaders. I just came of a meeting of the European Council yesterday evening and this morning on very difficult issues, also for the Union. Ukraine, climate change, energy and so on. And we have to agree at the end of the meeting on every sentence, on every word with 28 countries. When I start that kind of meeting, each time it is an adventure. Will we succeed or not? Of course, we are preparing it.
Tintin goes to Brussels.
Yeah, so my successor has had, he will have his own personality, of course, and his own way of working. But if he has a tremendously highly developed ego, he will not succeed. He will not succeed. Because then he has to find an agreement, or to find a consensus, also in order to save his face and to justify what he said in interviews and in all kinds of declarations. Here you have to listen all the time to the leaders, to big countries, smaller countries, so that at the end you feel what you can achieve. And today on climate change, it was a very difficult exercise. But we took on board everybody. Sometimes you have to work in stages. That helps a lot, so to convince people step by step.
Did you feel sometimes more like a maître d' or like a psychiatrist?
For a good politician, a good politician is not a psychiatrist.
Right.
At least he has some knowledge of psychology. Empathy is a gift that you need in certainly in that kind of political world. But as you said, I come from the Belgian context. I chaired a government with 5 parties, and in each party there are several wings. But I am most proud on what we achieved as a compromise when we agreed on the European budget. It was a budget which was decreasing in real terms. We were with 28 countries again. We need unanimity, and each of the leaders represent a coalition government. And so when he comes home, he has to defend what the budget and what he achieved in the budget. What's the beef for me?
Sure.
So actually we were negotiating with 60 or 70 parties around the table. But after 36 hours, we found an agreement. I'm still very proud of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember I was based in Paris, and you were racing often between Paris and Berlin, trying to get Sarkozy and Merkel to agree on things, particularly during the height of the Euro crisis. And yet everyone kept talking about the Franco-German couple as being so crucial, and they would do their best to pre-digest deals before big council meetings. Now one has a very strong impression that couple is separated, if not on the way to divorce. They're not trying to pre-digest anymore. Has that changed the way it works in the room? Is it better this way, or was it easier the other way?
Yeah, you had the very close cooperation between the German Chancellor and the French President. But it was not always so smoothly as people thought it was. And you are saying that I traveled from Berlin to Paris. So the simple fact that I had to travel means that there was no agreement. So it was not as they agreed and they presented their conclusion to me, and I have to sell them to the other leaders. That's not much more complicated than that. I saw a change by the end of 2011, when France lost his AAA status. And then there came some kind of imbalance in the relationship. Of course, after the presidential elections, it changed again. Now there is, between the German Chancellor and the new French President, not so new anymore, there's a good understanding, but you can't compare it to the, let's say, the best days of the Mercosur. But still, now, we achieved, we could take decisions on the European budget, on the banking union, and actually we tamed the Eurozone crisis in 2012, and then Mr. Sarkozy already left office. So it is, as always, much more complicated and much more nuanced than is written, not in your press, because you know everything, but in the press in general.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, were there moments where you said to yourself, I really can't take this anymore, that you actually threatened to leave, even tactically?
No.
Never?
No.
Did you ever want to?
No. No.
Why?
No, that is a question of a psychiatrist a little bit.
Never.
No.
Because
I disappoint you, eh?
no.
I know.
But you remind me of something. When we had an interview a couple of years ago, we spoke about your life a little bit, and that you lost your faith when you were a boy, and then somehow in the 20s it came back again, and you spend time in an abbey sometimes, not just drinking beer, but in contemplation. And I remember writing, and I'm curious what you thought of this. I said, you know, that you were a devout Catholic who was struggling with the sin of pride. And
You're again a psychiatrist.
But do you see that in yourself? I mean, you're not a humble person.
Without, I would put it in this way. If you are in politics, of course, you have to have some kind of ego. But my cursus honorum is a very particular one. At this stage of my career, when I became president of the European Council, I achieved all what I could achieve. So I could devote myself to the common cause. I didn't need it anymore for my own glory, and I felt it in that way. And so I consider this, and that is not some kind of false modesty or something else. But I felt it as a duty, as a responsibility, as an honor, but not more than that.
One of the things that we wanted to try to do, I only have one question for you, for the audience, for your little devices. It was the simple question of whether you all think the euro crisis is over or not. Just that. And if you could, I guess it takes 15 or 20 seconds to respond. We'd be curious. And then I want to get your sense. I know you think the existential crisis is over, but so we are going to count this up and see what the audience thinks, if all of this works. So please vote. We've got 7 more seconds. Well, you can see the results, right? 72% think there's more to come. Do you think they're right? Do you think the crisis is over, or simply having a rest?
Mm-hmm. And often an optimist is an ill-informed pessimist. Huh? You can also turn it around.
Of course.
If you put the question, is the euro crisis over? No, the economic aspect of the euro crisis is not over. We are still struggling. We have a rather modest economic growth, between around 1% and so on. If the existential threat on the euro, that's over. That's over. And you see it, you have a lot of indicators for all this. Some are disappointed that the crisis is over. But we saw it in, or see it on the financial markets. There's much more convergence also in the spreads. We see it also in the exchange rate. The euro is even
stronger.
Is too strong for our exporters. The euro became, even with the crisis in the emerging countries, some kind of safe haven. So I say often the existential threat is behind us, but the problems are not over.
But Greece is going to need another bailout, right? It's going to need more money. Everybody thinks so.
Yeah, but Greece received loans,
right?
There's no gifts, for 245 billion. What we are now speaking about is the possibility of 10 million, of 10 billion, or 15 billion. That is a huge difference with the past. They agreed now with the IMF. They have a primary surplus. They have modest economic growth. Some can even banks can even go to the market again. Situation changed dramatically compared to 1 year or 2 years ago.
How would you say Mrs. Merkel's understanding of the euro and German responsibility has changed? I mean, she has moved. I mean, like a scientist, she's looked at what's worked and not worked. But no one would ever accuse her of moving quickly.
You speak on Germany.
Yeah.
First of all, we took all the decisions with 28 or with 18 members of the Eurozone. That was not only Germany, not at all. Second point is that, of course, we took very important decisions in uncharted waters. For us, it was new, managing a monetary union with 17, with 18. So it took some time, and in the union it was a step-by-step approach, getting everybody on board, convincing them that measures were taken seriously in some of the countries, convincing the own public opinion that they have to show solidarity, because also it was in their own interest. Sure. So it is in a democracy. We are not living in dictatorships. We are living in 17, 18, 28 lively democracies. So it took some time, and it could be that some decisions were taken a little bit too little. You can qualify it too little and too late. But at the end, we delivered each time.
Because, I mean, step by step is really expensive. I mean, it's cost taxpayers a lot more than it should have done.
There are other countries in the world who have one president and one parliament, and it is difficult to make a budget. So we are not the only ones.
No. Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, some people suggest, partly because of the crisis, that you, in the end, became the Eurozone president rather than the whole council president. Are you worried about Europe really running at different speeds? And you can talk about Britain a bit too.
Yeah, but the strange thing is that I have no complaints vis-à-vis Britain. They cooperated very constructively during the Eurozone crisis. For instance, for the banking union, we had again to agree with 28. The single surveillance mechanism, the single resolution mechanism, was agreed by almost all the members, including the UK. The interest of the UK is a stable Eurozone and a prosperous Eurozone.
This I accept, but what worries a lot of people in Britain is that Cameron's gotten himself stuck into a referendum he really doesn't want. In return for a negotiation, he can't possibly succeed in getting enough to make his Eurosceptics happy. That's what I meant when I asked you whether you worried about strains in the Union.
But that's for later on. I speak now on today and what we lived through the last 2 years. The rest we'll see. Mr. Cameron has spoken as the leader of the Conservative Party. There is one condition, of course. He has to win the elections. And then after the election, he has to negotiate with the other members. And then after the negotiation, he will put the result of the negotiation to a referendum, to the British people. So there are if, and we'll see. I never answer on hypothetical questions.
Well, one of the reasons I asked you is because you won't be there then. It won't be your problem.
No. No, but that is not the reason why I'm saying this. Right. I will watching TV and have my own opinion.
Now, you have said differently in the past, we're about to have European elections that no one, I must say, feels very optimistic about. The rise of, however we characterize them, far right or populists, the words don't work very well because the countries are different. But there's a big Eurosceptical party in almost every country except perhaps Germany. How do you interpret this? Now, it's too easy to say, oh, there was always this kind of party in the past? Because it's not true. I mean, across Europe, they have a higher percentage across the board than they have had for many, many years. What's the cause, do you think?
Yeah, first of all, according to the opinion polls, there will be an overwhelming pro-European majority still in the European Parliament. Of course, you have always to listen to people, and even if they have no majority at all, but there will be an overwhelming majority of pro-European parties. So the institutions can function as before. That's my first. My second is that you have Euro-negative parties from the left, from the right, from all kinds of political spectrums. So it is not a homogeneous body. So that, but Eurosceptics covers a lot of nuances and a lot of differences among inside this group.
But I mean,
third element is that long before the financial crisis, you had very strong populist parties. Father Le Pen was second in the presidential race in 2002.
Jacques Chirac was very lucky.
Yeah.
That's true.
He won afterwards with 82%.
Exactly.
But Father Le Pen had 18%. So the daughter will do better. But 18% is already a lot. In my own country, long before the financial crisis, there was an extremist, a racist party, gathering 24%. In Austria, you had a higher party, 26%. Nothing to do with Europe,
I mean,
nothing to do with the financial crisis.
This is true.
So this is a phenomenon of civilization.
But it's now spread
Yeah,
more to
it is
other
part
countries.
of a political crisis,
right?
And
Which has to do with the image of Europe.
No, in a lot of countries, people lost confidence even more in their own institutions than in the European institutions. In a lot of them. So it is a much more complicated phenomenon than most people think. Of course, there is a part of, let's say, disappointment on European policies and sometimes on the European project. I will not deny this, but you have to see the broader picture. We can only convince those people by our words, of course, by our language, speaking more positive on the European institution, not blaming the European institution for something that you have to do yourself, your own duty. But we will ultimately convince them by our results in terms of living standards and in terms of employment.
One thing, you've just spent some time on Ukraine, and I don't want to spend much time because so much of the conference has been about Ukraine. And of course, you're not in charge of the Commission.
No.
Right? But do you feel a little bit that the Europeans and the Americans too were playing Sorcerer's Apprentice a little bit in Kiev, not thinking hard enough or strategically enough about the impact of the association agreement or even the flight of Yanukovych?
I think there are other people responsible for the mess in which we are here. But asking your question, we responded to a demand coming from the Ukrainian government, not even this one. It was the government of Yanukovych and even before him. And we negotiated with them. They had to meet benchmarks, conditions. We initialed this in the beginning of 2012. And then we said, no, before signing, we ask you to deliver on new benchmarks. And then they have to work again. So it is not for free. It is not that we say now we have to keep to bring Ukraine on our side and then for geopolitical reasons or whatsoever. If this was the case, we gave them just 15 billion for free and said no conditions are needed. No, we put strict conditions before we signed. We were ready to sign the association agreement. It went wrong when some of the neighbors put pressure on Ukraine trade restrictions that brought them in financial problems, and so on and so on. And then all started. But if there is a miscalculation from not only from our side, but also from the Russian side, and even from the Ukrainian government, is that nobody could foresee that the people of Ukraine, and that's called now Maidan, would be so determined. During months and months they were there, even freezing, to show their adherence not to the EU institutions, but to European values. And they were fed up
to some kind of post-Soviet mentality.
They were fed up with this mentality of corruption, lies, manipulation, and they made another choice. They made another choice for democracy, the rule of law, human rights. And I know that there are always in that kind of revolutions fauna and flora for people who take opportunity, who are trying to take benefit from this movement. But the vast majority of the people made the choice of values, and that's something that a lot of people inside and outside Ukraine underestimated.
Do you think we should stop calling Russia our strategic partner?
I hope that we can overcome this crisis, but I fear that the world, also in our relationship, will never be as before. Never be as before.
Which is sad. Are you sad about it? Or do you think we've simply misinterpreted what we hoped the Russians would be or would want?
No, that would be a too kind interpretation of the fact that it's only a misunderstanding.
Right.
That would be very Christian, but not corresponding with reality.
Yes, that's right. Well, we've actually run out of time, but I want to ask you one last thing. You gave a speech recently where you have a contemplative side, and I just want to read you a couple sentences and then ask you about it. You said, dealing with the world of men increases one's longing for paradise, for the absence of conflict, jealousy, and vanity, a longing for peace and reconciliation and for unity. This does not bespeak weariness, but a desire for simplicity. Now, do you think after dealing with 28 countries, why would you want a desire for simplicity?
I will found this word of harmony after having left office the 30th of November of this year. Yeah.
All right. Well, I wish you luck and thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you both. We really appreciate it. President Van Rompuy, thank you so much. Steve, as always, it was really terrific. And now for